Would you please give a big Brisbane welcome to Glenn Steckling?
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to extend my thanks to the organization for the invitation, for the opportunity to be here with you all, to old colleagues and friends that are also here, and to discuss what I consider, at least personally, one of the most dynamic subjects that faces our civilization at this particular time. We live literally in amazing times. The abundance of information is really at unprecedented levels. We are learning more in the last several generations than perhaps for hundreds, if not thousands of years before. And in the last several generations alone, we have made an unending leap into the information arena. Some of the images that you see at the moment that we are putting on the screen come from the Hubble telescope. And if you go to spacetelescope.org, you will find the agency where you can find just a fraction of these images that you see. And the reason that I chose to include this right at the beginning is that sometimes we tend to perhaps lose sight of the incredible intelligence and manifestation of creation that is beyond this planet. And when I, at least, look at some of these images, it is awe-inspiring. Endless galaxies and universes and solar systems and planets, uncountable billions and trillions of them, in a three-dimensional medium that literally surrounds once you go out into space. And so by showing this, I hope to also give that impression of what the possibilities are out there. To give you example of just what a few of our learned educators feel about this subject, we looked at the quotes by Dr. Gdansky. Highly developed civilizations on planets of the suns in our galaxy should be the rule rather than the exception. Dr. Howard of Harvard University. Intelligent beings abound in the universe, and most of them are far older than we are. Professor Thomas Gold of Cornell. Life on Earth may have started when spacemen landed here billions of years ago. And astronaut and physicist Brian O'Leary. Contacts between extraterrestrials seem to have been going on for decades, but we still do not want to admit it. The interesting thing is, while the debate has raged for many, many years about whether there are aliens or are not, and where they come from and what their purpose is, to some extent, every one of us in this room, we are all aliens, because we have discovered that space is the womb of creation. And in that womb of creation, organic and chemical synthesis takes place constantly. And the amino acids and the RNA and DNA that compose life are constantly interacting. And even our most learned professors agree that this chemical process rains down on the planet by literally tons every day. And this we share in commonality with the rest of the planets and the rest of the creations in space. We come from the like bakery, so to speak, that manifests the materials that evolve into what we are. And, as astronomers say, human beings are the norm and not the exception. So we will find, as Professor Panampura said, who runs the Chemical Laboratory of Maryland, that do not be surprised when you land on a planet somewhere someday that someone just like you walks up to shake your hand. And I find such statements extremely profound. and extremely revealing as well. In essence, we have to be like good detectives. We have to nurture this inquisitive nature that we have within us, to explore, to discover more, to go further than this, to simply be spoon-fed information that is far too easily spun and far too easily controlled. We have to look for ourselves. And then we do this, we will find that we do not take phenomenal leaps of imagination when we are getting from one spot to the next, that we must build a foundation that will allow us to understand how life originates, how space travel is capable of. We are not, when we go into space, when we simply go to the moon, a simple 250,000 miles away, it takes the culmination of all our technology to get there safely. We must understand gravity, the pull of the other celestial body. We must understand trajectory so that when it gets there, we're there, and so on and so forth. And when you go to the moon and you look back at the Earth, what a small little blue orb we're looking at. Now, take the next step to the next planet, in which you go millions of miles away, and you look back to that place that you think that is home, and is no more than a flicker of light in a three-dimensional medium of stars that surround you. This is not for the faint-hearted. It is not for the inexperienced. It takes thousands of years of evolution and of technology to get to the point where you can travel the reaches of space safely. Space contains immense storms, as we would have of monsoons and hurricanes that we're familiar with. We have immense electrical storms, giant gravitational poles. We have plasma fields. Space is an ever-changing ocean, not any different than the ocean not too far from here. And we need to understand that it is more than just the familiarity of terms like warp speed Scotty and away we go, or to the next star and turn left. When you look at pictures as this, it doesn't work that way. So let us give credit where credit is due. And if we are to acknowledge that we have visitors from other planets, from other worlds, then let us give that credit to the advanced thinking that is required to get here and to visit us. We cannot simply imagine that you can take unending bounds of technological leap and scientific advancement and not also advance yourself socially and in the way of thinking. Everything comes about when we have congruent advancement. So let us think about that for a moment. If we have technologies that are thousands of years ahead of us to simply come here and to interact with us, what type of life are they living? What type of social beings are there? What have they experienced in this vast domain of exploration and experience that we have not? We travel to other countries and we become exposed to different ways of thinking, but yet we are not all that different. It opens our awareness. And this type of travel is the maximizer of awareness opening, because you get to see life and its manifestation in all aspects. Thoughts to think about. But yet there can be no doubt that they have come, and for thousands of years. Show me one historical text or one area of history where we do not have record. We have record in China, ancient China, of aerial hovering devices. We have the biblical times of the flying shield and the flying scroll and the wheel within the wheel and the pillar of fire by day and the glowing cloud at night. In Alexander's time, when recently we looked at programs where they talk about what we call USOs, or unidentified submerged objects, the fact that these objects come in and out of the water And during Alexander's time, they witnessed that in the Hindu area of India. And so much so that this curiosity was piqued enough to go out in boats into the water and look down to see where these vessels may be coming from. When we look at our Native American and indigenous peoples, our brothers and sisters from what we call a more natural state, they too have a great deal of history involved, beings that have come to interact with them. And lo and behold, have also brought us a message and have been of benefit to our societies. And this has progressed for every century that we can possibly think about. We're all familiar with the term flying saucer, which really was not coined during the time of Kenneth Arnold, but before, in the late 1890s, where flying saucer was a term that was used in the Texas newspaper to describe these type of vehicles. But what a plethora of information and sightings came about, shall we say, in the last 60, 70 years. Here in Australia, you have uncountable reports, newspaper articles of these type of devices, flying, landing, people standing on the edges waving, Papua New Guinea. So it really is no grand surprise. And during this time, this subject was very real. I am fortunate to have grown up, at least partially, in an era where this topic of UFOs and extraterrestrial visitations was taken extremely seriously, not so much ridiculed and skeptical as we have today, and perhaps rightfully so. But we had devices that were landing. We had retrieval of devices. We had them photographed over every nation's capital that we can imagine, printed in the newspapers, by the hundreds, up to the point of at least 700 a day. And this is based on the Air Force estimate. And the Air Force alone says at least 15 to 18% are unexplainable by their own estimate. So this time, from the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, as much as we sometimes don't like to regress, this subject was real. And during this time, the original contactees came about. Because people always ask, well, what do they want? If we take, for example, what we call Fermios Paradox, which was a scientific group of men that were in Los Alamos in 1950, and they were discussing this subject. And they weren't discussing if they were here or when they were here. What they were discussing is why they are here. They already knew that they were been here for a long time, but why are they here? A topic we have tend to digress a little bit from. And so contactees, like for instance George Adamski, which I'm fortunate enough to represent, was able to have interaction with these people from other worlds. And of course many scoff at the idea, well, who comes from another planet or another world that looks like you and I? We somehow have been able to accept that they can look like hideous monsters or bizarre creatures with all type of evil intent. That we readily can associate to. But the fact that somebody that looks like us would come and actually not wish to do us harm, but wish to interact with us, that we find somewhat of a little bit of a stretch. But nonetheless, not everyone thought that was a stretch. And I will give you an example of this. In 1967, my father and mother and another lady by the name of Madeline Rotifer was invited to go to NASA before a panel of 22 scientists. And this was not, as we would call an interview, this was an interaction. And when they came together, they discussed how these craft worked. They already knew. Where they come from, I knew that too. How they looked like, not a problem. What they were interested in above all was how many of these human beings who come from other places are living and interacting amongst us. Now let us contemplate that for a second. In order to walk amongst us and live amongst us and to exchange information back and forth, they cannot look too much different than each one of us that are sitting in this room today. 6 months later, the Pentagon was also interested in the same information. Colonel Freeman. Once again, my parents dutifully walked out with the films and the information and sat there in the Pentagon and interacted with this group of officers, and they knew a great deal. They did not find George Adamski to be a kook, and they certainly knew that he had materials that, unlike anyone else, had gathered, because George shared them with everyone. He did not divide. He did not say that you are the government and you're withholding information, and so you're the naughty people, so we're not going to give you any more. It didn't work that way. If anything, he contacted all governments, all denominations of religion, for which he received the Golden Medal of Honor from Pope John XXIII for, and all military bodies. And he gave them information freely. Where we think that they withhold information from us, well, rightfully so, they do a bit. But on the same token, these are the people who are running the organizations that are responsible for our well-being. And these are the people that need to know the facts as well, because they have their finger on the button, so to speak. So this is the very real time that I was fortunate to grow up. And I can say to you that during the last several years of Adamski's life, the films and the pictures, several which you will see, some of the slides are still photography of some of these craft, is amazing. And there was an international press conferences in the Mayflower Hotel that my father organized, in which all the names of Huntley and Brinkley and all the journalists, the professional ones, which still had a bit of integrity, were all there. And they viewed these films and they were awestruck. But they were well aware that we have visitors from other worlds here. So this is the type of information I try to pull people back towards when I talk to them a little bit. I don't like to give lectures per se, I like to interact with you, because we all have different things, ways of thinking and experiences, and it's very important that we exchange information in a civil manner so that we all can learn. So what we'll do here is I want to show a few slides and give you a little bit of background. Some of the slides you will see have not been shown. There's a couple of unpublished photographs in there that remain in our archives. And some of them have to do with the conditions on the moon. After 1967, there's a panel of scientists, several of them befriended my father, and gave him direction to where he could apply for more information. And at that time, we had collected information from the Lunar Orbiter series and the Mariner and the Surveyors. And as the Apollo program sprung into life, that information was put into microfiche and microfilm into catalogs as well. And over a period of the next 10 to 12 years, my father dutifully wrote to these departments, ordered their catalogs, of which you'll see some of the frames to give you a general idea. They came in little 2x2 frames that are on catalog pages with the numbers, and you order them, and then you get a 20x16 picture, high glossy Hasselblad, and then you go through them and you can see things such as clouds, you can see activity in the moon, and you can see that the conditions in space, to some degree, depending on the celestial body, mime that of what we have here on this planet. And since George Adamski spoke of these things already in the 1950s, he spoke of the Van Allen radiation belt. He spoke of the firefly effect 10 years before John Glenn reported it. He spoke of the fact that there's 12 celestial bodies, at least, in the solar system. And for many years we argued 9, and the Soviets said we got 10 or at least 12, and now finally we come around to it, we're willing to admit some of these things. So he was a conduit for his space contacts to ease material into the public and also into the space program. He was consulted on several times how to construct satellites and proper shielding, because we had trouble with the solar rays and the radiation that we were unfamiliar with, and he provided answers to that. And there were successful launches because of that. And in fact, there is a gentleman who is in the southwestern United States area, and this particular individual is a retired aerospace engineer, as well as a Department of Defense contractor. He was witness to the 1950 sightings over Korea. He was part of the Marine unit that was there. And when he came back from Korea, he was completely infatuated with the subject because this man witnessed it flying in formation. So he goes to Adamski up in an area called Palomar Gardens on the base of Mount Palomar where the 200-inch Hale Observatory is. And he and his wife and about 40, 50 other witnesses are on the property. And one of these craft flies low level over the trees and touches down in the field next to it. And Alan says he's running across the field, screaming at George, look, 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 look what's landed. And George says, oh, they come by all the time. Tell this man, who has worked for the government, who has witnessed them as close as we stand in this room, that they don't exist. He will laugh in your face. And he has also been responsible for experimentation into electromagnetics, and he is quite a unique individual. And this is just one of the many individuals that associated with George and was part of this very real space experience that we have been fortunate enough to happen all over this planet. So some of this information, as George talked about the moon being a light atmosphere, gravitational field. Let's stop for a second. So as Adamski spoke of gravitational fields, of atmosphere, of water, people laughed. But yet we're not laughing any longer, because we know that water has been spraying out of geysers on the moon. In fact, one of the articles you will see from 1970 is a release from the Apollo program where the instrumentation they left from the previous landing measured water geysers spraying for 14 solid hours. So what my father wanted to do was to collect the information that would also support some of the statements that Adamski made in a more modern time, and then present it to the public as general information so that it may inspire other people to look deeper. And so we realize that we are not just this tiny speck that is fortunately the right distance from the sun, with the right amount of radiation, at the right time of the millennium, and everything come together to just fortunately produce what we know today. When we look into the cosmos, creation is much more kind and much more universal than that. So let's take a look at some of these slides. What we did here is in the beginning is to give you some idea of some of the people that reported objects over a period of time. And many of these are old newspaper articles from pilots from Pan Am, from the X-15 series of when we were doing our supersonic testings there at the time of Chuck Yeager and all the individuals before that. And they all witnessed unidentified flying objects. As you can see here, this article deals with the X-15. This is another picture which is also available in color, which is by far much nicer. It shows a cigar-shaped craft over the New Mexico area, and as it moves across the horizon there. This, some of you may have seen, this is a more recent picture. This was taken in Utah in the parks out there by a particular gentleman and his family, and he happened to have his camera, and one of these objects came over the top of the ridge, and he snapped a shot. When you see the hull in this particular configuration, you're looking at it as when the power system is powered down low. Picture it like a rheostat for your lighting system. As it comes closer and closer to the planet, the power system starts to diminish so that it does not interfere with the natural electrical currents that our planet produces, and so you can see more of the craft itself. In reverse order, as that power continues to increase, the craft is surrounded by a field of ionization and becomes enveloped in what we would call a cloud or a luminescence. It becomes larger and larger as the speed and the power increase. It also helps to deflect any type of foreign debris or any type of materials that may penetrate. The force field, for lack of a better word, is simply deflected away. Just goes around like you would water around the edge of an airfoil. This is a cutaway section from Leonard Cramp's book, Space Gravity and Flying Saucers, an excellent book. Many of you may be familiar with Leonard Cramp. He did orthographic projections of these particular craft, not only of the Dempsey craft, but the Coniston photo, which we'll see, which was taken by several young gentlemen in the Devonshire area of England, and also a South American craft. And they came up with 33 feet in diameter, and the fact that it has an average of 3 to 4 occupants. This particular device is used for planetary travel only in the atmosphere, not interplanetary. Some of the astronauts talked. Everybody always says, well, where are the officials? Where are the recognized people with the name that so we can accept? Of course, Gordon Cooper to all of, and he was very vocal about his sightings, actions. In Griffin Show in the 70s, clearly the human beings from other planets, and they were visiting this world. He was not shy. His last book was, of course, Leap of Faith, which is a very interesting rendition of some of his experiences. This is one of the Cedric Allingham photos from Flying Saucers from Mars. This was also in the 1950s. These stamps, go ahead and go back one, please, Phil. Can you reverse? Maybe not. We'll reverse here. The stamps that you saw were part of a project done by the Prime Minister of Grenada, Prime Minister Gary. And he was extremely vocal in 1978 in trying to get to the United Nations to establish a commission and to acknowledge more of the extraterrestrial phenomena. My father was contacted for several of the photographs that you'll see here, and as you can see here, the type of pictures that were taken and from the telescopic shots, my father gave them to the Prime Minister, and they released these stamps in recognition of that. And can you imagine how nice that is for what we call an island country to be so forward and to open in their thinking? Can you imagine they would do that here in this country or in the United States? Another one released by Equatorial Guiana as well. And these are part of a collection. This was taken by one of the Gemini spacecraft in orbit with several of our astronauts. And this is a separation module here. But you can see here in formation, way, way far above the atmosphere, so we cannot claim that it's scrubbing from the atmosphere that's causing the luminescence here of these two objects. And for any of the people who've been following the STS or the shuttle program, we have all been quite familiar with some of the videotapes in which we see these craft moving around, and sometimes we even have thought we've seen projectiles being shot at them and what have you. And so this type of operation up in space and above our atmosphere is not uncommon. This also is showing two of them here, octagonal, as the propulsion system is in full operational status as they come up. Now, of course, at one point somebody tried to say that these were clouds. Now, if we look down here at 60,000 feet, or even our most gigantic storm at 80,000 feet, this is nowhere near in the same level of the atmosphere as we would have clouds. These articles I included here because I thought they were of importance. The scientists who talked that ET might just look just like us, of course Dr. Panampura was one of them. And the rest of that article says to forget all those Hollywood notions and science fiction things that we've been so accustomed to. Because when we deal with the foundation of organic chemistry and synthesis and the foundation of the construction of our molecules, we know how life evolves. It would be like going in for a heart operation, but instead of asking for the heart surgeon, we ask for our neighborhood auto mechanic. And we just hope that the operation comes out all right. We don't want to fill in the gaps to understand how things are. We just wish to imagine and make that leap. This talks about the Air Force Academy teaching its cadets that aliens or UFOs are alien visitors. And this is part of, or was part of their standard curriculum. How to deal with encounters, both airborne and otherwise. So the officials have been prepared for a long time. The rest of us are a little bit behind the curve sometimes. Once again, the same article. I have all of these in my original notebook here. Part of it is composed by George and my father, and I travel with that because I enjoy interacting with you after the fact. And so for those who wish to see, we're more than happy to spend some time. This is the Coniston photo, or the Devonshire photo, as it comes above the knoll, as it starts to energize its power system. This article, our family was part of. How we became involved with this was in the 1950s, my father tracked UFO sightings over Europe. And on a giant map, he pinpointed them on there in order to get an idea where more concentration was. When we came to the United States, in 1963, we were in downtown Washington. And there was a newspaper reporter and about 40 or 50 other individuals on the street in downtown nation capital. And one of these craft, like the one you see there, was hovering at about 12 or 1,500 feet above the city. And everyone witnessed it. And it maneuvered around, as it does on the magnetic lanes, and then shot up into space. It was in the paper the next day. Go ahead. What we're doing is we're skipping a few frames here because we tried to make a separation of thought. Here are some of the articles that came from GA's time, or George Adamski's time. He was at one point offered a seat on the United Nations and he declined it. And his reasoning was that if you become a recognized official, what you can and cannot say becomes much more censored. And he was much more interested in being able to talk to the people directly and not being told what he couldn't say. A younger picture. Here's some of his original telescopic shots that were taken with 6-inch telescope and later 15-inch telescope in the Mount Palomar region. As you can see in the background, a very old frame, the moon, a large cigar-shaped craft, trailing smaller ones behind it. We will find as we look at NASA pictures, there's a remarkable similarity. It's a large cigar-shaped craft in front of the moon. Some people have asked size. Size can vary from any to a very small craft of 1,000 feet to a very large craft of 50 miles. And if we take the word of the British Astronomical Society, during a time of perhaps 10 years, they recorded from different angles and different instruments huge cigar-shaped craft and vehicles moving in front of the moon, along the lunar surface. So the reality is there, and so are they. Smaller in formation. The strength of these photos, and George Adamski had some of the best. There's not a single documentary company that I have ever seen or has ever contacted us over the last 40 years that has not wished to use not only George's pictures, but his motion picture footage as well. I have some of it on videotape, but I don't think we have a setup in order to show some of those sections, which is really something we need to do in the future. But the value of these pictures are that they were taken at a time when computers did not exist, when computer graphics did not exist, when Photoshop did not exist. Today we can compose and compile anything we want. In fact, that is a specialty of our security agencies, to be able to do that. These articles came from the contact that happened on November 20th in 1952 over the desert out in California, in which one of these craft landed and an occupant came out. And there were 6 witnesses to this event. It was reported in the local newspapers, and also plaster casts were made of the impressions of the feet in the sand as well. They have various symbols on the bottom, which we'll talk about. This is one of the unpublished photographs. You can see the ocular of the telescope in part of the frame. You can see the craft. There's been some debate about the reflection behind this porthole, whether it's coming from the direction of the sun or whether there's reflecting something from behind it back outwards. But there are some things that can be said. Of all the analysis that have done of Adamski's picture, they've come up with several statements. 1, it is impossible to duplicate or fake the graying effect of a photograph taken through a telescope. That is the laboratory's own analysis. 2, the people that used to work for Cecil B. DeMille and for the aircraft modeling companies examined these photographs and said that they are, by their projection, at least 30-some feet in diameter. To build models and suspend them would be an impossible feat at that time. Another shot. Now everybody always says, well, George's pictures were so clear they can't be real. And then of course, when we see pictures that aren't clear, they say everything's so unclear it can't be real. No one can make up their mind. But I can assure you, there are dozens of shots prior and after this photograph. And what George released is the best picture he had. He didn't want to give you the lousiest, he wanted to give you the best. So there were multiple tries in order to get decent shots as these craft hovered. This shows the 3-ball condensers, which in a later motion picture footage, the last one George took while he was still alive, one of these retract back and forth as this craft moves along. And you'll see frames of that which are included as well. This photograph was taken over the Palomar Gardens property, and you can see the tree in the background. This tree is no more than 75 feet high. Still exists today. This craft flew low level and dropped a package. From the previous meeting in the desert, the occupant of the spacecraft asked for one of the photographic plates in George's pocket. At that time, with that particular camera, they had glass plates which had emulsion on it. And he gave it to him. And this gentleman put it in his pocket, took it back in the craft, and took off. 2 weeks later, this craft flies over, hovers, and drops a package. And in that package is the same photographic plate with a series of engravings. Here they are. Now, the interesting part to all this is that here is a same series of a set of engravings that is within 80% similar, except for these were recovered in the Brazilian jungle by a fellow by the name of Professor Marcel Homé. And there's an area called the Piedra Pintada in which these symbols were engraved, and they estimate to have been at least 10,000 years old. The combination of these two symbols has to do with the propulsion system, or the free energy device. And there was a South African scientist by the name of Basil van den Berg who deciphered this and built a free energy working model. And he contacted George and said, "I've finished, it's complete. I'm going to Switzerland to hold a press conference." George says, "Do not do that, because the world and the governments are not ready to divulge this to the public." He says, "I'm doing it anyway." He got on the plane, he never got off. No one has seen this man again to this day. We talked about the footprints. This particular visitor was wearing shoes that had symbols in the footprints, in the bottom of the shoes. And that's because in this particular craft, the instrument panel is like a Hammond organ. And you move the keys as well as your feet fit into particular indentations or impressions on the floor. The combination of this is how this particular craft is piloted. And these indentations also have to do with propulsion system. And they were examined by many, and this happens to be in Holland, I believe it was. And they were doing scientific studies on how these symbols relate. They took it very seriously. This is a painting rendition of the first contact. We have associates and co-workers in Japan, in which there is a very talented individual who is very artistic, and he has put together this particular painting along with others to try to give people an idea of how that craft looked in that November morning. Some more telescopic shots. These craft have rings along the inside of the flange that spin in opposite direction using gyroscopic effects to help to offset what we consider to be gravitational field of the planet. They do not use anti-gravity. They do not use anti-nature anything. They realize that the planet produces trillions upon trillions of volts of electricity that extend millions of miles into space. And this dynamo, for lack of a better word, this Van de Graaff generator that we live on, produces so much power and energy that it is far more efficient to merge with it than to try to fight it. So they don't attempt to fight it. They simply merge with the energy field that the planet produces, and then they travel. And since the speed of magnetism is twice the speed of light, it gives you an idea of their capabilities. Also one in a series of photos that shows the outside flange. Some of the cigar-shaped, or what we call carrier or mother craft in orbit. These are working and very similar to a system that we have. And the smaller craft of this particular series rides on board between in their interstellar travels. And then when they come into the higher atmosphere, the mother craft or cigar-shaped craft hovers and releases the smaller craft. And these are a series of photos taken. Give you an idea of some of the historical photos that we collected and put together in a poster that's out on the table to give people an idea of those early years. This is the only surviving photographic shot of that original contact as the craft comes up above the hill. You can just see the outline of it along with the 3-ball condensers, and that's the best they could do with that photograph, the camera he had at that time with those emulsion plates. Also of the Palomar Gardens property and some of the historical shots of that time. And there were people and astronomers coming from the Mount Palomar Observatory and spending time and talking. This was a very active time in which there was a much lively debate and even greater exchange of information. This is one in the series that I told you about before, of the motion picture footage that was taken in February of 1965, about 6 weeks before G.A. passed away. And this craft came down over the trees, and then first there was a small, what we call registering disc or remote control device that came down and moved, that would be, you would see in the motion picture footage, between the trees measuring the distance. And as that went away, this craft came over the top of the tree line and proceeded to mine the maneuvering distances between the tree. They really weren't that far away, several hundred feet this way and about 100 feet that way. And as it moved, it also took one of the 3-ball condensers and retracted it in and out. You can go through the series. This type of maneuver is very complicated, or what we would call dangerous, not for them, but complicated. to bring such a craft in such proximity. George is pictured here in Australia. I'm sure that some of you may be familiar with the fact that he came here on several of his world tours and talked in New Zealand and Australia and India and then throughout Europe. And this gives you a little historical background of some of the shots of he interacted with many people. Here, that's a nice photo of him. That's how I remember him. Also from the other countries, he went before Queen Juliana, was invited. He was also supposed to go before the British family, but there was a great deal of press ridicule at that time, so they decided to back away from that meeting. But he did have a very lively debate with the astronomer Moore, and it's one of the few circumstances where Moore doesn't discuss it, because the exchange of information was more than he was able to digest. This is from Rome. Here you go. This is from here in Australia. This is the front side of the Golden Medal of Honor that was awarded to George by Pope John the 23rd about, 10 days before he passed away. And the good part of it is you have a witness here in the second row. May Morley Flitcroft went with George Adamski to Rome, along with Lou Zinstag, and was able to verify that medal, which resides in our archives at this point. Now we will progress to some of the lunar shots. Here's Earthrise, and I thought that was appropriate to kind of give you an idea of what our planet looks like when we are on the moon. Of course, there's been a great deal of debate whether we went or not. We did, of course, go. And if you had a telescope, you were able to see the Apollo land on the moon, and you were able to see the LEM, the lunar module, as it left the lunar surface as well. And so it is a truism that we did go to that body, and hopefully we will return, at least in a public forum. Some of this has to do with lunar gravity and the argument that the fact that there's 1/6 gravity in the moon. If we use the 1/6 calculation in the formula, the neutral gravity point would be here at 23,000 miles, but it isn't. And in fact, Werner von Braun was very adamant in his book that the neutral gravity point is at 43,000 miles, which is telling you that the moon is exerting a greater gravitational influence because it backs what we call L1 closer to the Earth. And since it is an exponential equation, the lunar gravity increases as it gets this lunar neutral point, extends itself. So in some areas of the moon, you can have as much as 60% of Earth gravity. We do this at deep craters. We know that if we go into large areas like the Dead Sea or Death Valley, areas that are below sea level, the concentration of atmosphere increases, and so does the pressure. And if we go down several thousand feet, like in the Grand Canyon, if you go through there with that river rafting expedition, which is great and fun, you'll find that it is a bit stifling and a bit hot because the gravity becomes more condensed as you go further down. This is a NASA photograph, and you'll find it on the cover of the book Alien Bases of the Moon, which is my father's book. This comes directly from their archives. Here stands the astronaut. Here stands the elliptical luminescent device over his head. This just to give you an idea. There were several astronomers, including we had our telescope aimed in the crater of Archimedes, and for a period of 3 days there were 3 crafts laying in the bottom of it. And if you look at the diameter of Archimedes, it's almost 50 miles. So you can imagine the immense craft that lays in the bottom of that particular crater. On the 3rd day they were gone. As I told you before, you can order the material in various formats. This happened to come in small 2x2 pages, book about so thick, and then it has all the numbers on them in which you can order them yourself. You can see, look at the incandescent hazing area above the lunar surface, the atmospheric field. And then you order the pictures and you purchase them and you go about your research. It's not hidden from you, but it's not just handed to you on a platter either. you got to look for. Also here from the lunar surface. There's a talk about the field that is created around that our astronauts have experienced, and they have just explained it as a way, as over extended space travel time, the particles around become charged and give off somewhat of an incandescent glow. And I think that many of us may recognize that we have heard over the years that there have been contacts reported in which these particular individuals or these extraterrestrials are glowing when they come outside of the ship. This is a byproduct of the electrical field that has saturated the body over a period of time, or higher resonance as it's called. And we experience it the same. This is a lunar orbiter shot which shows a cigar-shaped phenomenon laying adjacent to this crater. And as you can see, the sun is coming from this area, illuminating this lip of the crater or the front side of this device and casting this shadow behind it. What the book does not do is give you answers to everything. That's for you to discover. What it is supposed to do is to open questions and to encourage you to look further. This is in a series of photographs of these luminescent type devices as it continues to get one shot after another in what we would consider like a drive. You continue. It goes closer to the lunar surface and above it as each frame continues. Very much as we have seen with some of George's pictures. Here's an area of crater which has been enlarged, and there sits a small luminescent device also in the lip inside this crater. There are some people that looked further at this photograph and thought perhaps that this represented some type of construction or ununiform type of phenomena there on the surface. I can't say. Perhaps. There's also, as you can see, all the photographs always contain, in the book you will find all their numerics in there. And my father encouraged everyone to write to NASA and order material as well. Some people have successfully gotten some, and some of them have gotten it airbrushed. But they get something. This is the backside of the moon. And as they are in orbit over the backside of the moon, which was dark during that particular time, look at this photograph of this huge luminescence that is being cast. As it literally illuminates how many square miles of this area on the backside of the moon. And our astronauts have reported luminescent objects moving about, craters that glow with different colors, and so on and so forth. There's a publication this thick called the 1966 released the phenomena of lunar anomalies. As you can see there's the book that has to do with the moon, and the first book is Why Are They Here? And I thought that was kind of interesting, the 1950 Fermios Paradox, that they were discussing why are they here? And this book has to deal with some of those questions. Look here, there seems to be an area, you look at a valley here, an indentation. And there's something that hangs over the lip of it, because you can see it obscures. First it casts a shadow, but it obscures also the lip of that crater. There's a whole areas with different type of phenomena like this, for lack of a better word. Look here, we have an area where this particular device leaves a track behind it. There's also another one up here, as you can see. And there's a very fine picture that continues from here that shows this device going across the plane, down the crater rim, across the floor, up the other side, and keep going. And of course they said that was a rock. Look at this photograph for a moment, and look at the inside of this crater. Look at this perfect S that's in there. And there's areas on the moon where there are letters and series of engravings on the surface. Not any different than we experience on Mars as well. We talked about water on the moon, 1970, geysers, recent articles. I find this amazing. 30 years ago, we release information to the public, and then it just goes away. And then 30 years later, they say, hello, guess what we discovered? water on the moon. And everybody says, oh, that's nice. But they don't wonder what happens in between. Why is there no follow-up? There's an area on the moon where they have particular constructions that look very much like irrigation systems or like reservoirs. And as you can see, they're kind of spaced evenly apart here. And at certain angles they're dark, and at certain angles they're silvery because of the sun's reflection. But they look very much like what we have in Southern California, all over the place, because they're living in an arid climate. And if you look at the next shot after that, it would be, it's not on here, but it's very silvery. So it looks very close to it. But here's a very nice shot. Look at this little crater here, and look at the big one. And like milk pouring out of a pitcher, look what comes out of here, over the rim, and bellows into the crater below it. The next shot is a close-up, I hope. There it is. So there's discussion about the moon being mined, and the minerals being used, and activity being there. On one orbit, you see only part of this crater. And look at this haze or fog. As a pilot, we don't like the fog. As you get closer to the ground, you can't see anything. But on the next orbit, here's the same crater. Look at where the fog has moved. It has now left the obscuration and moved to the north of the frame. And they are talking, but how do you have fog if you don't have moisture? You have it. How would you have fog if you don't have atmosphere to sustain it? You must have it. So once again, like good detectives, we have to take the next logical step to understand what's going on. Here showing a bit of the mist, rolls over the edge of the valley of the ridge here, obscures it on both sides, also something here as well. Here's the crater, look at this triangular, look at the shadow it casts, and look at the fact that you see this part of the rim, but this part is obscured. And when you get these high-definition photographs that are so big, and you go through with a microscope, magnifying glass to find these things. They just don't put an arrow there and say, guess what we found? Here as well. And it casts a shadow underneath it. And also something here as well. We talked about mining. There were areas where the craters are very cut and platformed. We have this greatly among us in the southwestern United States where we're doing strip mining, and it goes down and down and platformed and cut. And there are areas on the moon where these craters are very shaped, and you can see things being poured over one side or another. And that's what that's indicating there. And I think that's it for the slides. Now let's see if we can get this to work here. Usually I don't like to read directly from the text, but since with the closing statement I want to impart a few ideas, I think it's important that I don't miss any of it or extrapolate on it. The question's always asked, why do they come here? What have we learned? Or what benefit can it be to us? It is said that philosophy has been defined as the love of wisdom, a systematic, general conception of the principles as applied to philosophy of life. In essence, knowledge of the cause of all phenomena, both of the mind and matter. Cosmic philosophy embraces the universe, conceived as an orderly and harmonious system, complete unto itself. And our present perception of mind and matter must be expanded to the realm of cause in order to understand and take a place in the classroom of everlasting learning. Observation is our greatest teacher, but we must learn to see the cause of the related purpose of all forms or manifestations. Principle or source of origin and nature's laws remain forever the same. They are immutable. Mankind's concept of the law expands with the desire to know more and more of our purpose in relation to the cosmos. Our neighbors on the sister planets of our solar system came to this realization a long, long time ago, that every minute particle in the cosmos is interrelated with every other particle. Thereby, in order to have even a small perception of the purpose of life, each phase must be studied in relationship to the whole. They shared a theory with all who was interested, and gradually theories grew into facts as they explored further and further into the universe and the unification of all life. A humble reverence and love for all the all-knowing intelligence, as it is expressed in every living form, became their inspiration. These words are those of George Adamski, as he related from his space contact. Ladies and gentlemen, the conditions that exist on our planet today are obvious. Time alone has proven that no viable progress or security can be sustained by the avoidance of either reality or truth. We face not only astrophysical, but geophysical changes in this solar system and on this planet. Some we have most assuredly contributed towards, while others represent the greater natural rhythmic cycle of nature. Such cycles represent the living, breathing pulse of all created matter: birth, function, regeneration. Since we represent one of the few planetary societies incapable of space travel, our comprehension and ability to adjust to these variable cycles and their approaching consequences is paramount. The understanding of such principles, plus the fact that all people everywhere are brothers and sisters originating from the one infinite creative source, is generally misunderstood. Even though our present societies have become scientifically and technologically advanced, while not the most advanced our world has ever seen, we continue to dangerously suffer from a serious lack of social and inner development. As George Adamski often said, we have become technologically giants and remain for the most part intellectual morons. However, with an even modest analysis of the human mind, such is not too difficult to comprehend. For today, the law of least resistance is practiced all over this planet. Few can even envision the concept of a common humanity. Therefore, it should be the aim of those who have acquired this greater understanding to lend this deeper perception and a guiding hand to all those willing and struggling to achieve this awareness. Of the billions of sentient beings living on this world, there are also billions of minds expressing multiple stages of development, It is through tolerance, respect, and understanding of these many phases that we can foster true social and individual advancement. Observation is indeed our greatest teacher, for it allows us to see what we are, what we have been, and what we can be. And on this planet, this home we call Earth, the same variety of minds also exists throughout the cosmos. However, the difference lies in through great personal effort, these interplanetarians have learned to refine this awareness towards the benefit and betterment of all, and not merely as another instrument of further division. It has been said that people are like the keys on a piano. When played harmoniously, beautiful melodies can come forth. Hopefully, as we attempt to control our anxieties, our tensions, our fears, our wants, dislikes, and rampant opinions, all of which our minds have formed through centuries of expressing personal will, we will once again recognize the supreme intelligence that radiates within all creation. And at the same time, we may also address the growing separation that we feel between ourselves, each other, the very nature and creation that sustains us. For centuries, space visitors have come to remind us of these important messages. Not to awe us with their flying machines or their aerial capabilities, not to dazzle us with their technology, and most definitely not to mystify or to frighten us. They understand us all too well, better than we know ourselves. They have come to remind us of our potential, our common birthright, our direct connection to the cosmos that we all share with the infinite. For centuries untold, their message has been, look up, wake up, join us. Be inspired to expand and demand more of yourselves. My friends, in essence, life is simple. It is uncomplicated and livable right now. Not tomorrow, not in 2010, not at some future inconvenience, nor in some other imagined dimension or spiritual plane, but right now, right here, this very instant. Some of our ancestors of ancient civilizations understood this and lived and practiced this. Treat others as you would be treated. Walk a mile in your brother or sister's shoes. Treat the planet, nature, and all of its creations with care and respect. Reaffirm this, and we will live a long and rewarding life. Who here today can truly say that they are unfamiliar with these very basic concepts? And if we truly desire a helping hand, I can say that our extraterrestrial friends have always been there to faithfully extend it. So since I will not be here tomorrow for your conference, your little panel discussion, we decided to reserve a little time in case you had any questions or comments or feedback. I would be more than happy to take those. Yes? I'm not sure it really works.
Test one.
Thank you. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks. That was great. Did George Dante's parents ever talk about having had contacts themselves?
His mother. His mother discussed the fact that they were not unfamiliar with the concept of of extraterrestrial life. They did not feel that it was a stretch of either faith or their ideas. So I would say that to some degree, yes, that is so. Anyone else?
Yes.
Yes. Bill, come on, I can't hear you.
If the astronomer talked to him very often, why it was not public?
Some of it was. Some of it was public. There is one of the journalists who came and did some research with us discovered that originally when the observatory was constructed, there is in the back part of it, there is a large 200-inch cement circular replicator of the mirror. But there used to be a plaque on there as well, and that plaque said something to the extent that this is an acknowledgement of our extraterrestrial friends who assist us in our endeavors. And that plaque was later removed after several years due to complaints from people who didn't feel that that was appropriate. And so, oftentimes, what they have in that little astronomical city that's up there in Mount Palomar, those doctors and, in fact, Dr. Johnson used to come all the time and talk to George. His mother, by the way, was the one who presented George with his first 6-inch telescope already a decade before that. And Dr. Johnson, the son, was responsible for the mapping of the star patterns before the construction of the telescope began, so that they were going to position this device and this instrument in a proper location. And so there was a great deal of conversation. George was a person who did not arbitrarily endanger or expose people. He only spoke names and locations when it was verified for him to do so. He was more interested in getting information across than rather exposing the source of the information. Because oftentimes, as we talked about this situation with the 22 scientists at NASA, obviously they didn't go to the newspaper the next day and hold this big revealing press conference so that everybody knew about it. So what happens is that individuals release information, or you become associated into these circles through the ability to converse without jeopardizing them. And that's an important distinction, because we all want to have validation. We all want to have recognition. Dr. So-and-so said this, and Prime Minister so-and-so said that, because then we feel that it's okay that we can justify our thinking along the same direction. But in reality, it doesn't work that way. So a great deal of information changes hands in a more civil atmosphere. And some of it was talked about and some was not. Anyone else?
Yes, Glenn. With regards to the crafts that enter our atmosphere, do you have any information whether they were constructed solely for travel to this planet?
No.
And the other question would be too, was there ever any mention of them visiting other habitable planets outside our solar system?
Absolutely. We're talking about civilizations and technology that are using the transportation system as simply as I used the transportation system to get here. I jumped on an airliner and I flew halfway across the world, and here we sit. And for them it's not any different. They're simply going a little bit longer distances, but they have developed the technology and the ability, and they are able to harness the understanding in order to use it. And so they come here because they're interested in our way of thinking, and they have helped us many times in many different situations, and they observe us as well, and they interact. We have to understand the technologies on many levels. For instance, if you take one of these cigar-shaped craft in orbit, and they would wish to understand what is going on in this room, they can monitor everyone in this room down to the molecular level. Far better than any science we can imagine. They can record your every thought, your every heartbeat, every biochemical process that's going in your form, and they never have to leave the safety of their ship.
That's beginning to sound like God, isn't it?
No.
Pretty deep, pretty deep.
Why would that be? I mean, if you go into the jungles of Papua New Guinea and you show them a videotape of a 747, are they thinking you're God?
Probably.
Maybe. Anyone else?
Somebody over here, was it?
Was someone before me, but I've just got a quick one. Glenn, that was wonderful. I so enjoyed that presentation. I'm wondering, are they still around? Do you think they're still about, or do you think this is something that happened for a certain period of time and they're doing other things now?
Oh, at that particular time when we spoke to NASA, there were several 100,000 is what they were interested in knowing the number. And that number was revealed to them to, a round estimate, and they were aware of that. And that's pretty much one of the major questions they wish to have confirmation of. Help comes, or interaction comes, as we are willing to accept it. If I go to my neighbor's house and there's a ruckus, and they're constantly yelling and screaming at each other, and I knock on the door and somebody throws a pie in my face or worse, pretty soon I stop knocking on the door. I go somewhere else where intelligent communication is possible. And so what happens is we have to realize that we are just a tiny grain of sand in this cosmos, and as much as we would like to have, shall we say, priority, it doesn't work that way. So they come out of their own free will, and they sometimes spend a certain amount of time amongst us in order to learn, because they believe that how we think and manifest is also how they once did, perhaps a long time ago. And they want to show us what we can do as well. And I give you a little example. They do so without fanfare. They do so in every aspect of life, where it happens to be a park ranger, or a clergyman, or a street sweeper. They are not dividing or feeling demeaned by the process upon which they serve, which is something that we have yet to kind of learn here. In this one particular instance in Los Angeles, there was a newspaper editor, and he was debating with one of his reporters the existence of UFOs and extraterrestrials and what have you. And they were having a rather lively debate. The door was open. And there was a particular gentleman that had gotten hired there a couple days before. And this individual walked into the room. And I have this directly from the editor himself. And he listened to the debate that was going on. And for lack of a better name, we'll call this individual John. And they say, after they're going back and forth, they say, "John, what do you think?" So he looks at them both and he says to the editor, he says, "In the bottom desk of your drawer, which is locked, you have a long railroad tie, about 9 inches, nice and thick steel. Why don't you bring that out?" So the first thing out of the editor's mouth is, "How do you know I have this in my desk? It's locked. I've never taken it out." He says, "Come on, bring it out." So he opens it with his key and pulls it out and he hands it to him. And this particular person, John as we called him, stands it upright on the desk, which is made of solid oak. He places his finger on it and pushes it right through the solid oak. Looks at the other two, smiles, turns around and walks off. Question answered. He never came to work the next day. It made the point. And the point was to create awareness. And that's what they want to do. They don't walk into a room and say, "I am from XYZ." First thing we do is grab them. First we think they're nuts. The next thing we grab them, and then we carve them up and dissect them. This is a very dangerous place. We are very unstable in our thinking. When one moment we cannot control our emotions. One moment we love the person, the next moment we hate the person. And in between we will do anything to justify our own particular emotional state of mind. So we are like stepping into a cage full of tigers. Not even that. Tigers are much more predictable. So no, they move around areas. There were a particular time when they were very active in the former Soviet Union. And there are other times when they go somewhere else. They're always here, but their influence is more or less depending on our willingness. If we insist on being aggressive, if we insist on living a destructive lifestyle, if we insist on willing to accept that nothing less than Armageddon is our destiny, who can help that?
Another question.
Yes.
This is wondering why the aliens told Adamski they came from Venus, but we now know that Venus cannot support intelligent life.
Do we? Let's look at it for the moment. And this is what I wanted to express, because we are thrown absolutes. First of all, let us just take it basic and then relate it. We were once told that the earth was flat, and that wasn't so either. Right? And then we were told there's no life other than on this planet. But lo and behold, we're willing to exist. The conditions on the moon are better. Then we were told there was no life beyond this planet. But yet we're saying on Mars, which we're preparing to go to, well, gee, they have somewhat a little bit more of an atmosphere, and the temperature range is very close to that of this planet with only 30 degrees difference. If you look in the 1998 National Geographic, that expose on Mars and also shows the temperature range of this planet, the range is from here is like 200 degrees to 150 degrees, and from Mars it's almost the same with a 30 degrees difference. So we are saying there's water on Mars, we have atmosphere on Mars, we're just not going to where the water in the atmosphere is. So what happens is the conditions that we throw out at the public doesn't mime the reality of the fragments of information that we also give them. Concerning Venus, for instance. Why is it that we only see computer generalizations of Venus? You see yourself when they show Venus flying all over this orange topography in the whole black sky. But they don't show you all the radar images of Venus. First they tell you the temperature is 800 degrees and the winds are blowing 400 miles an hour and the atmosphere is 6 times denser than boiling oil. But I can send a probe there with a parachute and land on the surface where I want to. Then of course the question is, if we have this superheated condition with winds that are howling, this would grind the topography into nothing more than sand dunes. Lo and behold, the next revelation. Venus has beautifully sharp mountains and mountain ranges. So what happens is that we have to be, like I mentioned before, good detectives, and we have to establish a foundation of fact upon which we can carry through from one logical step to the other. Now we go further in the universe, into the solar system, and we're talking about the moons of Saturn, perhaps having frozen surfaces and water underneath. The bottom line is here is that we don't know. And what little we know always gets deciphered for us, spun for us. Because you have an agency that belongs to the Department of Defense. They build this device. It's stuck onto a rocket by the Department of Defense. And it's shot to where it's going to go. And they get the telemetry back. And if they decide they want to tell you any of it, they might tell you something. But 9 times out of 10, you hear the same old dogmatic principles repeated over and over and over again. We have never revised. We still believe Columbus discovered America. And we celebrate it on top of it. So the conditions are much different. And we also, and this is what the scientists say as well, when you talk to them, they say, think about that. Why is it that we tell this to the public, and why is it that we give this information to the academic community, and why doesn't it match? So there we go. So when we have a public space program, and this is what I encourage the most, a public space program that we participate in. Unfortunately, I don't have the $20 million to give the Russians right now, but I would go in a heartbeat. But we need to be able to step beyond this planet. And because of the geophysical changes that are coming, global warming is only a small portion of it. Yes, sir. The next. This gentleman here has had his hand up as well. Whoever has one, go ahead.
Good afternoon. In your research, have you heard anything about helium-3 on the moon?
Helium-3. No, I'm not familiar with that term.
Helium-3.
Helium-3. Helium-3. I would. I'm not going to tell you it's something that I don't know. I mean, I've read a few blurbs here and there, but I cannot recall any specifics to my mind. So it would be dishonest of me to say any more than that. Yes, sir.
Colin, there are actually sharks on this planet that can detect a heartbeat of an animal 4 kilometres away. Going back to what you were saying some time ago. I'd like to thank you enormously for your presentation. The only one that even compared with it was Adamski himself in the City Hall, and I had the pleasure to be there.
For that I won't say. I can never fill his shoes. But yes, as you mentioned, Colin, nature, to give you an example, we like to think we are so ingenious. Not too long ago, there was a gentleman, a hydroelectric engineer, who decided to study the construction of the Nautilus. And by miming the construction of the Nautilus, he was able to develop a water pump that was 400 times more efficient than anything we have constructed before. And this gives us an idea that while we are so furiously pent upon running our frantic lives, that many of the answers that we seek surround us every day. Because nature, which exists throughout the cosmos, continues to progress unendingly. It is us who constantly struggle with a step forward, 5 backwards, develop a civilization, tear it down, and so on and so forth. Imagine if we could have the fortitude to put away our differences, to go the extra mile. And this is the lack of will we see in today's political climate. We all point the finger and say, well, when they come to the table, we will too. That's a cop-out, as we call in my country. Right? And we award heroism to those in battle, but we forget to award or acknowledge the same heroism to come to the table. What is it said? Blessed are the peacemakers. And when we can finally have progress without destruction, where would we be in 1,000 years?
Indeed.
Yes.
Carrying on further, one of the slides that you showed was the photographic plate that was returned. I guess you're aware of the small insert on that? Adamski showed an expanded...
Yes, there was a piece of microfilm as well.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
It was... One day maybe you might present us with an expanded version of it such as he did.
Well,
It's a bit controversial, but perhaps...
it is regardless. I mean, there are so many different aspects to the information that George gave. Basically, there was a piece of microfilm on there which gave, there was some more photographic evidence included on there. And suffice it to say that's sufficient. I think that more than enough material is there just to digest what it is. But, and I think that's enough for now. Yes?
Over here.
There's also a person here, let's not forget as well. Yes?
Any comment about big minds?
No. Everybody has to stand for their own... Everyone has to represent, to the best of their ability, what they feel is relevant. I personally, or my family personally, had history with Mr. Meyer long before Mr. Meyer was Mr. Meyer. This goes back into the early 60s. But I am not going to impose my opinion. I am not here for that. His information, how it's presented, and what it says and doesn't say is for all of you to determine. Yes.
I just wondered if you had any thoughts about why we don't operate as humans, as a telepathic society, and why we are individual thinkers?
Well, yes, there's both, which is a requirement. individuality is what makes the painting diverse, right? Because we would not like to be all zombies or clones cut from the same mold. Our diversity, our individuality is based upon our experiences accumulated over an excessive period of time. Whether it's one lifetime or a million, we can all talk about that in one form or another. Telepathy is a birthright. It is a natural process of communication which nature uses all around you all the time. How many times, for those of you who have animals, does your pet come and sit in front of you? And he looks at you. I have a couple Samoyeds at home. Now I could say, well, what does the beast want? Does he want to eat? Does he want to go out? Does he want to go for a walk? So on and so forth. Sit for a moment and you will receive an extremely clear telepathic picture of what that animal would like to have. It doesn't work with words. It doesn't work with language. These things are meaningless. Telepathy is a picture language. And it is used to communicate across any distance and any expanse. How well we use it is based upon how well we have been trained or learned. Just like anything else. At 5 years old, I personally was not Mozart or a child prodigy. I could not play the piano. I had to practice. And because we do not instill upon our children these concepts, it is hard for them and is a greater effort for all of us to develop down the road. Because first of all, as we get older, we have done something which we all tend to do, is build resistance. And my father, before he passed away, made a very profound statement. He said, the problem was not the truth. The problem is my resistance to it. In other words, the struggle to accept it. And so what we have done as we get older is we have become so clogged in our thinking, we have ceased to be the natural people that we were as children. And so the children are able to use telepathy and communicate in the natural world, and we can do so as well. How many times have you gone to pick up the phone, and as you reach for it, it rings, and lo and behold, it is the person on the other side of the line that you were just going to call. Because in your mind, you pictured that person and the fact you were going to call them. And unbeknownst to them, or perhaps beknownst to them, they picked it up and called you instead. My parents used this very much as I was growing up. My father got off of work, and instead of using the phone to call and see what happened, they would experiment with it. And my mother would send him and say, well, we need milk, we need eggs, we need this. He goes to the store and brings home milk, eggs, and whatever. Sometimes it wasn't exactly correct, and sometimes it was. So we have to practice it. We have to acknowledge it exists, and then we have to be willing to practice it, and then we have to stick to it. But it is a picture language. And that's the difference. If I send you the picture of the word cat, it means nothing in Russian. If I picture the cat, well, then you pick it up and say, oh, there's the cat. In simplistic terms, that's exactly how it works. Anyone else? Yes.
Any thoughts about other contactees who might be genuine?
I'm not in the business, so to speak, of telling people what they should think. So I let each one speak for themselves. And if we do investigate, and if we do build knowledge, then that truth will reveal itself. We have some people that are genuine, perhaps there are some others that are not, but each one of you should be able to determine that for yourselves. We are all sentient, we are all intelligent beings. Are we not capable of determining, if we become so separated from our inner self that we no longer can determine which is feasible and which is logical and which is rational and which is sustained by the other principles that surround us? Have we become so insecure that we cannot see that any longer? I have lots of time, so my time is yours, depending on what you want to invest.
Do we have any more questions? Okay.
wanted to comment on the geophysical changes coming up that you mentioned. Something that puzzles me is why people go out of body to check on their children, and you know, some must be able to go out there out of body and see what's out there on other planets and on board the spaceships, I guess. The other thing I was wondering is, George Dempsey did spiritual training as preparation for what he did, but is there a corresponding, you know, some sort of spiritual training that you would do today that would be equivalent to that, or that you might do today?
Let's address each phase of this. First of all, we talked about the geophysical changes. And we're using the term global warming. And regardless of what our politicians and what our industrialists like to talk about, it is changes that come. And as I mentioned, they are part of the natural rhythmic cycles of nature. To give you an example, the sun goes through an 11,000-year cycle in which polarity changes, and then we have an escalation of what we call the plasma field. Our planet, and each planet in this solar system, because we are all interconnected, like the movements of a Swiss watch. You cannot remove one from the Swiss watch and expect it to work. We are dependent and balanced upon one another. One of the reasons that they did come here in the 40s and 50s we could mention again. But the planet itself has a 26,000-year cycle in which we go through geophysical changes as well. We see oscillations of the poles, we see temperature changes. The severity of this is dependent upon where we stand as a geophysical feature. And what happens is as we mentioned before, of all creation we have birth, and we have function, and we have regeneration, which we experience ourselves in our own forms that we live in at present. Soon we will come to a time of regeneration. And so this planet is going about a conjunction of both the solar cycle and the planetary cycle as well. Now, can we contribute to the severity of the swing of the pendulum, so to speak? And yes, we can. And we do contribute to that, whether we're using hydrofluorocarbons or whether we are burning too much of this and that and what have you. We have a stewardship of the planet upon which we live, and we are taking very poor care of it. And since we are not leaving, we better do a much better job, because this is the only home we have. So when these changes come in the cycles that we see coming, we will see geophysically planetary changes that we have seen 26, 50, 100,000 years ago. Because the planet is a living, for lack of a better word, breathing entity itself. And we need to understand this. Why is it that the animals, prior to the tsunami in Indonesia, go to high ground 3 days before the people do? It is because they are attuned to these changes and they don't question. They receive the impression that it is coming, and by instinct they respond. They don't say, well, was it God talking to me? Was it not God? Is it coming next Thursday or this Thursday? Should we go or should we stay here because the real estate prices are good? And while we do that, we suffer the consequences, right? And then what is the first thing we do? God, why have you forsaken me? How many messages does he need to send you? Right? We want none of the responsibility, and at the same time we want to place all the blame somewhere else as well. And that means that we have to live a little smarter. Let us look at Mexico City, the most populous city in the world now, passing Tokyo. It is residing in the bottom of a volcanic crater, a belt, so to speak, in which there is a gas belt, there's a volcanic belt, and what have you. This is a highly geological, unactive area, unstable. And when that blows, you have 26 million people who didn't have the intelligence to go somewhere else. Whose fault is it? Not that there should be any fault. Where does the intelligence lie? It's that simple. The next part of that question was philosophical thought. There are some things that are universal regardless of who the individual was that come to bring it, and we find that certain times in history, unique people have come amongst us to teach us pretty much the same thing, whether they happen to be Chine, or Buddha, or Jesus, or anyone else who comes for the betterment of their brothers and sisters. They have very simple principles, and which we find the most difficult to apply. And if we would take these principles to heart, we would find the advancement we're looking for. It doesn't make any difference where you go to attain it. There is no magical spot on the world that is more magical than the next one. How can there be? Since there is no division in creation, it is there everywhere. So this is just as a holy spot as the next spot and the next. So therefore, where does the intelligence lie to recognize that within ourselves? And this is what is called philosophy of life, cosmic philosophy, or science of life. And George, in conjunction with these people, sat down and constructed a program called the Science of Life, in which there are 12 lessons to it. And it is constructed to be taken one lesson at a time so that one can discipline your own minds. It's like a book. We give you the book, you read the whole book, you skip every other page, and then you're finished. Huh? Right? Because we're impatient. We can't control ourselves. So by doing one lesson at a time, we actually have to think about it as we go to school, one grade at a time. And so this philosophy is of great benefit. And I recommend it to anyone who's interested. In the old days, it used to be a correspondence program because there were more people that had the time to do that. But it's still available. Are there schools on this planet that teach that? There may be places where a principle here or a principle there is being applied and what have you. But we have to look for that ourselves. And we have to see where are we in our current phase now and how much of it is we're willing to digest. So we always want to have... I had a question the other day, and we were talking about levels of expression. And so the question was raised right away, well, that's fine and dandy. That's perhaps the next phase of the next phase. But in 20 phases from now, where will it be? And I said, when you get to the 18th phase, you'll understand the 20th. Let's take one step at a time. Did that help, Eddie?
Do we have any more questions?
Sometimes I meander a little bit. Anyone else? No?
Okay.
Everyone's hungry. All right, very good. We'll see you at dinner tonight.
Thank Glenn Steckling very much, ladies.
Thank you.